Trump versus Somalia and Ilhan Omar, Politics, Poverty, and Africa's Struggle for Dignity. Welcome to the Bold African Voice, BAV, the channel where Africa speaks with courage, clarity, and conviction. I'm Zainab Karoma. Today, we unpack a stormy controversy, Donald Trump's sharp attack on Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and Somalia. What's true? What's political theater? And what does it mean for Africa's global image? Stay tuned, because this is more than just a headline. It's a test of how Africa is seen and how we choose to respond. In mid-September 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump unleashed a sharply, often personal tirade at Representative Ilhan Omar, Democrat from Minnesota, invoking criticisms of her Somali heritage and ostensibly linking her to fraudulent behavior in Minnesota, and using scalding language to disparage Somalia as a nation. Key claims included assertions that Somalia is overrun by corruption, terrorism, government collapse, piracy, and famine. That 70% of its population lives in extreme poverty, and renewed allegations that Omar married her brother to help his immigration status. Ilhan Omar, for her part, responded with pride in her heritage. I am proud to be born a Muslim. I am proud to be born in Somalia. I am proud to have become an American, she posted on X, formerly Twitter. Also, drink some water and touch grass was among her retorts. Meanwhile, Somalia's government has not issued a strong public response. Analysts suggest that Mogadishu may be cautious, given dependency on U.S. support for security, counterterrorism, and humanitarian aid. What the data actually shows versus what Trump's rhetoric says. Many of Trump's criticisms are not invented. Somalia does face severe challenges, but they are often framed without nuance, sometimes exaggerated, and in some cases factually questionable. Corruption and governance. According to the Transparency International Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI 2024, Somalia scored 9 out of 100, where 0 is very highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, placing it 179th out of 180 countries. Only one country scored worse in that ranking. In the context of sub-Saharan Africa, where the average is about 33 on that same scale, Somalia is dramatically worse. Weak institutions, lack of accountability, corruption in procurement, embezzlement, bribery are repeatedly cited in reports. So on that front, yes, the claim that Somalia suffers from very significant corruption is well grounded. But it's not unique. Many African countries face high corruption, though perhaps not as extreme. Poverty, conflict, famine, etc. Somalia has had decades of civil war, continual internal conflict, especially with al-Shabaab, issues of food insecurity, droughts, famine, and displacement. These are documented and undeniable. Estimates like 70% of the population lives in extreme poverty are harder to pin down. Some poverty measures do suggest very large percentages of Somalis live under severe deprivation, but precise percentages depend on definitions: extreme poverty, national poverty line, etc. Trump's number is plausible in the broad sense, but the term extreme poverty might be used loosely. Other claims, the brother marriage rumors, etc. The allegation that Ilhan Omar married her brother in order to obtain U.S. citizenship has been investigated, denied before. It is widely viewed by credible sources as a debunked or unproven rumor, rather than an established fact. Using it as a factual claim is problematic. Also, the rhetorical framing, a place with nothing, no anything, and then they tell us how to run our country, leans heavily into stereotypes. It's not strictly false that Somalia has serious governance challenges, but that framing omits all the degrees of progress, the diplomatic relations, the institutions, the diaspora contributions, etc. Africa-wide comparison. How does Somalia stack up? To understand the full picture, comparing Somalia to other countries in Africa is essential. Country CPI score 2024/rank corruption perceptions. Key challenges/notable differences. Somalia, 9 out of 100, 179 out of 180. Extremely low on governance indicators, weak state institutions, frequent droughts, conflict, famine, heavy dependency on humanitarian aid. Diaspora remittances are sizable. South Sudan, approximately 8 out of 100, worst or near the bottom globally. Also war-torn, state collapse, huge humanitarian crisis, low institutional capacity. Eritrea, Libya. Among lowest scoring in Africa too, very corrupt with weak institutions. They have different histories. Eritrea is highly authoritarian. Libya is fractured since 2011. Both have additional challenges. Seychelles, 72 out of 100, one of the best in sub-Saharan Africa. Good governance, small population, relatively stable. Less conflict, more developed institutions. South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, etc. Range in the 30s to 40s CPI scores. Many face serious corruption, but also stronger institutions, more stable governments in many regions, more economic diversification. So, relative to many African nations, Somalia is exceptionally low in many indicators of governance, corruption, and stability. But exceptionally low does not mean utterly devoid of positive attributes, progress, or hope. What's new and emerging in this case? The recent failed attempt by House Republicans, led by Representative Nancy Mace, to censure Ilhan Omar over her comments about Charlie Kirk set off this renewed volley of criticism from Trump. Omar's response on social media has been strong, reclaiming pride in her heritage. Media and analysts have noted the racial overtones and the political benefit for Trump in mobilizing those criticisms in his base. Some of the remarks, especially about marrying her brother, are seen as resurfacing debunked conspiratorial or racist narratives. There's also been domestic U.S. political movement, debate about free speech, whether censure or impeachment calls are valid, and the role of fact versus rhetoric. Critical analysis, what's at stake and what's honest versus what's political theater motivations. It seems clear that much of Trump's rhetoric is less about truth-telling and more about political theater, appealing to base sentiments, raising questions around Omar's legitimacy, a classic border/immigration-based strategy, and employing stark symbolism, e.g., they come from nothing, then lecture us. There is also a recurring strategy across U.S. politics of using a person's heritage or place of birth, especially if it's a conflict zone or failed state, to question loyalty, competence, or authority. This is deeply tied to xenophobia, racism, and othering. The harm in oversimplification, painting an entire country like Somalia as government collapse, corruption, bribery, conflict, terrorism, famine, and piracy, in one breath ignores variation. Geography, semi-autonomous regions like Puntland or Somaliland with different stability, the presence of functioning institutions in parts, diaspora engagement, improvement in some sectors. Stereotypes reinforce stigma and risk making meaningful international cooperation harder. Aid donors, international investors, peacekeeping forces, etc. may view Somalia as hopeless rather than as fragile but improvable. Fact check, one ethical responsibility. The marriage sibling claims remain unproven and are widely considered to be rumors. Leveraging unverified claims undermines credibility and can constitute defamation. The 70% poverty figure might be broadly in the ballpark depending on definition, but needs contextual data. What is extreme poverty? What is time frame? What sources? Using such numbers without caveats can mislead. Politics of identity. Omar is among the first Somali-Americans in U.S. Congress. Her identity is deeply tied to Somalia in popular perception. Criticizing her often becomes a proxy for criticizing or diminishing her homeland. That can inflame diaspora communities and touches on larger U.S. debates about who belongs, citizenship, and what it means to represent. Africa-wide implications and comparisons, why this matters beyond U.S. politics. Reputational spillovers, comments like Trump's are not just U.S. internal matter, they feed into international narratives. Governments in Africa, especially Somalia, have to constantly deal with external perceptions. Negative stereotypes can affect foreign investment, tourism, aid, diplomatic leverage. Comparative performance: other African countries that were once considered similarly dysfunctional have made measurable improvements over time. For example, Rwanda has dramatically improved in corruption perception rankings. Ghana often ranks comparatively well. Botswana remains among the least corrupt. So Somalia's near-bottom status is not inevitable or permanent. Diaspora politics. The Somali diaspora in the U.S. and elsewhere is significant. Incendiary rhetoric at Washington resonates back home and can influence local Somali politics or the morale of Somalis abroad. How diaspora communities perceive themselves is shaped by these debates. Aid dependencies and international relations. Somalia relies heavily on international support for humanitarian assistance, food security, counterterrorism, etc. If criticism from foreign leaders becomes too harsh or tied to conditional aid, that can complicate access or willingness of donors to engage. Also, overly negative rhetoric may reduce soft power or sympathy. Forward-looking: what could or should happen? Next, here are scenarios and suggestions for how things might evolve and what Somalia, Ilhan Omar, the U.S. might do to move beyond mere rhetorical conflict. Somalia could respond more assertively if Mogadishu decides that the reputational harm outweighs the risk of upsetting Washington. We may see formal statements condemning the rhetoric, perhaps through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or even through Parliament. Engaging international media to correct or contextualize data might help. If not, silence may be noticed more than words. Data and transparency improvements. Because many of the criticisms are based on perceptions, CPI, etc., Somalia and its federal regional governments could invest in transparency, more rigorous audits, procurement reform, strengthen anti-corruption institutions, etc. Even modest improvements could shift perception over time. Some of this work is ongoing already. Ilhan Omar's political positioning: Omar seems galvanized. Continuing to assert pride in heritage, as she has, may help among her constituents and supporters. She might also double down with data, policy arguments, rather than just defensive posture. As a member of Congress, she can bring forward oversight or challenge political norms regarding heritage-based attacks. 1. Media, fact-checking, and organizing diaspora voices. Given the use of some unverified claims by Trump, e.g. the marriage allegation, civil society, journalists, and diaspora activists can do more to debunk, document counter-narratives. Somalia's diaspora is large. Mobilizing that soft power, writing, op-eds, lobbying, can shift perceptions. 2. U.S. political consequences. Domestically, this incident can feed into larger debates over immigration, race, Islamophobia, free speech, etc. For Trump or his political camp, attacks like this may yield short-term gains among some base voters. For opponents, they present liability risks, potentially galvanizing backlash or reinforcing support for Omar among progressives. 3. Long-term, will Somalia improve or deteriorate? Improvement is possible, but will require security, reducing al-Shabaab or other armed group influence, governance, strong central institutions, stronger accountability, rule of law, economic development, improving infrastructure, leveraging remittances, improving agricultural productivity, managing climate risks. Humanitarian response, addressing food insecurity, drought, health systems. Deterioration remains a risk if conflict intensifies, climate shocks worsen, or external assistance drops off. Humor break, because sometimes you just need it. Imagine Trump's rhetorical style as someone painting with a broad brush the size of a barn door. Somalia is enormous, but the brush paints everything the same color. Fine if your barn needs painting, but not so good if you care about detail. Omar's "drink some water and touch grass" reply is perhaps the best self-defense in Congress. Hydration plus nature equals rhetorical win. If Somalia were a movie character, think of the rugged underdog who's been punched repeatedly since '91 but keeps limping to its feet. Now someone is filming a parody and expects it to behave like a superhero. Criticisms of Trump's claims: what he misses. Even in a country as challenged as Somalia, there are semi-autonomous regions, e.g. Puntland, Somaliland, with varying levels of stability, functioning law enforcement, trade, etc. Not everything is government collapse all the time. There is progress, capacity building, donor support, anti-corruption legal structures, even if weak, international partnerships. These aren't fully washing out the negatives, but they matter. By focusing so much on Somalia's troubles, Trump's statement obscures systemic issues in many countries, including the U.S. Some accusations, e.g., nepotism, fraud exists there too. Criticism is often used politically, not as a comparative exercise. Using unverified rumors, such as the marriage allegation, risks defamation and undermines the seriousness of legitimate critique. Latest developments, as of September 2025, tied to this episode, the House of Representatives voted 214 to 213 to dismiss the resolution to censure Ilhan Omar, brought by Nancy Mace. The fraud case mentioned involves 8 people in Minnesota indicted over a large wire fraud scheme involving a housing services program funded by Medicaid, Housing Stabilization Services. Approximately $8.4 million allegedly stolen. Omar has publicly expressed pride in her roots and explicitly rejected the narrative set by Trump's claim. Public reaction is mixed. Some Somalis and Somali-Americans express hurt and anger. Others treat it as expected political hyperbole in the U.S. Some question why Somalia's government has remained quiet. Forward-looking assessment and what to watch. Here are a few indicators and developments to monitor in coming months and years to see if things shift meaningfully beyond rhetoric. 1. CPI and governance metrics. Will Somalia's score improve even slightly in coming Transparency International or similar reports? Are legislative or institutional reforms passed and implemented, e.g., procurement, law enforcement, Auditor General's Office effectiveness? 2. Security trends, progress against al-Shabaab or other non-state actors, stability in regional administrations. 3. Foreign aid and relationships. Will U.S. aid or other donors shift policy in response to such rhetoric? Will there be conditions tied to governance? How will Somalia balance condemnation versus pragmatic cooperation? 4. Diaspora engagement and political activism. More Somalis and Somali-Americans may become involved, sharpen counter-narratives, or support candidates' policies that push back on such attacks. Media coverage, both U.S. and Somali international, may influence global perceptions. 5. Legal and ethical standards in U.S. political discourse. Will unverified claims be more frequently called out and fact-checked? Will calls for censure or impeachment over rhetoric increase or be reined in? 6. Domestic Somali political dynamics. Will Somalia's government or civil society take up the reputational issue, using it to push for reforms? Will public opinion in Somalia shift, e.g., more criticism of leaders, or conversely, more nationalistic defensiveness? Trump's attack on Ilhan Omar and Somalia is part of a broader pattern. Using a politician's origin, identity, and a country's struggles as rhetorical weapons. Some of the criticisms rest on real problems in Somalia: poverty, conflict, corruption, but many are presented without context or nuance, or include dubious claims. Comparatively in Africa, Somalia is among the most severely challenged in terms of corruption and state capacity. But it is not static. There is room and active effort for progress. The dynamics between diaspora identity, U.S. politics, and international perception are deeply intertwined here. What happens next will depend heavily on whether Somalia, Omar, U.S. civil society, and the international community respond with more than sound bites. Because the danger is that such rhetoric simply normalizes xenophobia, weakens discourse, and mass problems rather than solves them. Somalia, in historical context, from collapse to fragile reconstruction. Somalia's trajectory since 1991 is often described as the archetype of a failed state. When Siad Barre's dictatorship collapsed, the country fragmented into clan-based militias. Unlike other African post-colonial states, Somalia never managed a smooth transition from authoritarianism to pluralism. Instead, it endured 1990s warlordism and famine, rival clans fought, humanitarian catastrophes, drew US-UN interventions, famously the 1993 Black Hawk Down incident in Mogadishu. 2000s, rise of Islamists and piracy. With no strong state, piracy in the Gulf of Aden soared. Al-Shabaab emerged as a dominant extremist force. 2010s, federal government in name only, Mogadishu reestablished internationally recognized governments, but they struggled to assert control beyond the capital. Somaliland, de facto independent, and Puntland, semi-autonomous, charted separate paths. 2020s, security operations and slow progress. African Union forces, ATMIS, formerly AMISOM, and U.S. support pushed back al-Shabaab, but governance remains fragmented. In short, Somalia has been rebuilding a state from scratch, something few other African nations have attempted post-colonialism. Africa-wide comparisons. Who turned things around? Somalia's current low rankings on governance, poverty, and stability are extreme, but not unprecedented in Africa. Other states have made surprising recoveries. 1. Rwanda, post-genocide 1994. In 1994, Rwanda was as collapsed as Somalia is today. Over 800,000 killed in 100 days, institutions destroyed, refugees scattered. Within 3 decades, Rwanda is now ranked among Africa's least corrupt, CPI score 53 out of 100 in 2024, and has one of the fastest growing economies. Lesson: ruthless focus on stability, security, and governance reforms can turn even the darkest situation around. Though Rwanda's model also raises questions about democracy and human rights. 2. Liberia and Sierra Leone, post-civil wars, 1990s to 2000s. Both countries endured state collapse, corruption, and brutal civil wars. International peacekeepers, UN oversight, and later democratic elections helped stabilize institutions. Today, while governance is imperfect, neither is labeled a failed state. Lesson: international engagement plus domestic reform plus diaspora investment can slowly build back legitimacy. 3. Ghana, 1980s to present. Ghana in the early 1980s was a basket case: military coups, economic collapse, Rawlings revolution. Structural reforms, strong institutions like the Electoral Commission, and consistent elections turned Ghana into one of Africa's strongest democracies. Lesson: building credible institutions, even if painful, pays off. 4. Ethiopia, mixed story. Ethiopia once represented Africa's rapid growth story, 2005 to 2015, with double-digit GDP growth and infrastructure boom. But internal ethnic conflicts and civil war in Tigray, 2020 to 2022, reversed many gains. Lesson: progress is reversible. Ignoring ethnic federalism tensions can undo years of growth. Somalia's unique obstacles. Unlike Rwanda, Liberia, or Ghana, Somalia faces 2 additional burdens: geography and climate, prone to droughts, desertification, and famine cycles. Even with good governance, climate shocks can devastate. Clan fragmentation. Somalia's politics are clan-based, making national consensus elusive. Many African states have ethnic cleavages, but Somalia's clan system is particularly resistant to centralization. This makes copy-pasting Rwanda's or Ghana's model difficult. Somalia will need a tailored pathway. Possible pathways for Somalia. Forward-looking. 1. Decentralized federalism. Empower Somaliland, Puntland, Jubaland, etc., while coordinating a lean federal government. Somalia might thrive as a federation rather than a forced central state. 2. Diaspora-driven reform. Somali diaspora remittances already account for approximately 23% of GDP, one of the highest in the world. Harnessing diaspora skills and lobbying can reshape governance. 3. Maritime economy. Rather than piracy, Somalia could develop a legitimate blue economy: fishing, port trade, and logistics. Its coastline is the longest in mainland Africa. 4. Digital leapfrogging, Somalia's mobile money adoption, like Hormuz Telecom's EVC Plus, is higher than in many stable states. Digital finance could bypass corrupt bureaucracies. 5. African regional frameworks. Integration with the East African Community, EAC, could help Somalia anchor reforms. Rwanda and Kenya could mentor Somalia's entry. Humor break. Round 2. If Somalia's governance were a football team, it would be that squad which never qualifies for the World Cup, but somehow has fans everywhere. Passionate diaspora ultras who won't let the dream die. Trump calling Somalia nothing, nothing, nothing feels like someone criticizing a half-finished house while ignoring the fact that the U.S. has its own leaking roof. Congress, anyone? Omar's retort, touch grass, should be adopted as Africa's new diplomatic slogan. When in doubt, hydrate and touch grass. Why Trump's attack matters beyond Somalia, African dignity and soft power. Africa is weary of being dismissed as failed. Trump's caricature of Somalia feeds into global narratives that devalue African resilience. Diaspora politics, Somalis abroad face double stigmatization, targeted in the West as immigrant other, and blamed at home for abandoning the struggle. Precedent for other leaders. If Trump or anyone can casually dismiss an African country as nothing, it sets the stage for other Western leaders to downgrade African voices. That's dangerous in a world where Africa's population is set to double by 2050. Somalia versus the giant strugglers. Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Nigeria 1, Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. Corruption and governance, DRC usually ranks in the bottom 10 of the Corruption Perceptions Index, CPI approximately 20 out of 100 in 2024. The state is nominally huge, but practically hollow in large areas, especially eastern Congo. Conflict and security. Armed groups, M23, Mai, ADF, terrorize the East. UN peacekeepers, MONUSCO, have been there for decades. Like Somalia with al-Shabaab, DRC's central government lacks reach. Economy and paradox, richest in natural resources, cobalt, copper, diamonds. But poverty remains staggering. Over 60% live on less than $2.15 per day. Somalia doesn't have Congo's mineral wealth, but it also doesn't have Congo's resource-cursed governance trap. Comparison, both countries have weak central governments, but Congo's scale and resources mean its dysfunction destabilizes global supply chains, e.g. EV batteries. Somalia's dysfunction mainly destabilizes the Horn of Africa and shipping lanes. 2. Sudan corruption and governance, CPI, approximately 20 out of 100, 2024. Long authoritarian rule, al-Bashir, then a fragile democratic transition cut short by the April 2023 war between Sudanese armed forces and rapid support forces. Conflict. Over 8 million displaced, famine warnings, and some regions completely cut off. This collapse echoes Somalia's 1990s civil war. Economy. Oil once provided revenue, but after South Sudan's secession, 2011, Sudan lost most of its reserves. Now it relies on gold, often smuggled. Comparison. Like Somalia, Sudan is torn by militias, rival warlords, and famine. But Sudan once had a functioning central state and urban elite culture. Its collapse feels more like regression, whereas Somalia never fully rebuilt after 1991. 3. Nigeria, corruption and governance, CPI approximately 25 out of 100, 2024. Still low, but stronger institutions than Somalia or Sudan. Nigeria has courts, elections, a noisy press, even if corruption undermines them. Conflict and security, Boko Haram/ISWAP in the northeast, banditry in the northwest, separatism in the southeast, and oil theft in the Niger Delta. Security crises everywhere, but Nigeria still functions as a state. Economy, largest GDP in Africa, $477 billion, World Bank 2024. Massive population, 230 plus million. Poverty is widespread, approximately 40% below national line. But Lagos is a financial hub, Nollywood thrives, and Nigeria exports culture worldwide. Comparison: Nigeria is messy, corrupt, and violent in parts, but it is too big to fail. Somalia, by contrast, is fragile and small, making recovery harder but also less globally destabilizing. Key insights from the comparison: 1. Not all failed states are equal. Somalia: stateless collapse, clan politics, terrorism, famine. DRC: resource curse plus endless warlords in the east. Sudan: civil war relapse after decades of dictatorship. Nigeria: chronic dysfunction but resilient institutions and global relevance. 2. Size matters. Nigeria's mess is cushioned by its population, economy, and cultural export power. Somalia lacks these buffers. DRC is too resource-rich to ignore. Global markets, EV batteries, depend on it. Somalia, despite its coastline, has less leverage. 3. Collapse versus fragility versus dysfunction. Somalia and Sudan equals collapse, institutions not functioning. DRC equals fragile, institutions exist but hollow. Nigeria equals dysfunctional, institutions work selectively but not collapsed. Forward-looking lessons for Somalia. From Sudan, avoid relapse. Once you start building, don't let competing warlords burn it down again. From DRC, don't become a hostage to geography. Somalia can diversify via blue economy and digital finance. From Nigeria, chaos is survivable if you keep some functioning institutions: press, courts, universities, vibrant diaspora. Somalia's diaspora is already its hidden strength. Humor break, round 3. If Somalia, DRC, Sudan, and Nigeria were in a group project, Nigeria would show up late but with flashy slides. DRC would bring raw diamonds but forget the charger. Sudan would storm out mid-meeting after a fight. Somalia would say, "Sorry, my Wi-Fi collapsed again." Meanwhile, Ghana and Botswana are sitting in the corner, sipping tea, wondering what all the noise is about. Why Trump's attack misses the African nuance. Trump's one-size-fits-all attack, Somalia is nothing, corrupt, famine-ridden, fails because Somalia is not uniquely bad in Africa. Other states face similar or worse dysfunction at times. It erases the resilience of Somali people and diaspora who keep the economy afloat. It ignores Africa's proven record. Even states once dismissed as hopeless, Rwanda, Liberia, Sierra Leone, can rebound. U.S. foreign policy, Somalia's image, and Africa's rebranding, problem 1. What Washington is actually doing in Somalia, beyond the tweets, money, and programs. Despite political noise, U.S. assistance to Somalia has been substantial. A recent USAID Inspector General report notes the U.S. government obligated about $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2023 and $420 million in fiscal year 2024 across humanitarian and other programs. USAID/Somalia's democracy, stabilization, and governance portfolio alone exceeded $120 million in oversight scope. Public dashboards show continuing humanitarian flows in fiscal year 2024 to fiscal year 2025 as well. Security and the AU mission. On the ground, the African Union's mission in Somalia has been in transition. The UN Security Council repeatedly rolled over ATMIS in 2024 pending drawdown decisions, and by mid-2025, AU discussions around a successor configuration, AUSSOM, and its budget took shape. Indicative budget $166.5 million for July 2025 to June 2026. 2026 at a troop rate of $828, the short version. International security support didn't vanish, it's retooling. Humanitarian baselines. Needs remain stark, but are slightly improving on paper. The 2025 Global Humanitarian Overview projects approximately 6.0 million people in need, down from 6.9 million in 2024, with OCHA tracking approximately 6 million people needing aid and plans to assist approximately 4.6 million. Down doesn't mean good, but nuance matters. Bottom line, U.S. policy is a blend of counterterrorism support, state building, rule of law, elections, local governance, and humanitarian relief, not a binary help-don't help determined by a viral speech. 2. How rhetoric can still move the dial, congressional weather. Rhetorical flare-ups create headwinds or tailwinds for appropriations and oversight. The House's 214 to 213 vote to block censure of Ilhan Omar after a GOP push led by Representative Nancy Mace shows how polarized the stage is. Attacks then escalated online, including a deport her drumbeat and Trump renewed personal broadsides. This climate can pressure committee chairs, hearing agendas, and the fine print in funding bills. Narrative risk. When Somalia is framed as nothing but corruption famine, it feeds donor fatigue and can strengthen conditionality demands. Yet the facts are mixed. Yes, governance indicators are awful, but needs are real and U.S. programs are active. Precision matters because appropriators and inspectors general read the footnotes just as much as voters read the headlines. 3. Somalia's structural counters to the caricature regional integration as a credibility anchor. Somalia joined the East African Community, admitted November 24, 2023. Full member March 4, 2024. Treaty ratified by Somalia's federal parliament in February 2024. That unlocks a rules-based pathway, customs union, common market, and regulatory alignment that investors and donors understand. It's not an Instagram glow-up, but it's institutional scaffolding that outlasts tweet cycles, poverty trends, and the nuance. World Bank analysis pegs poverty at approximately 54% national line in 2022, with forecasts for modest declines through 2027 if shocks don't derail things. Nomadic households remain most vulnerable. Translation: improvement is possible, but climate and aid volatility can erase gains fast. Security transition not equal to abandonment. The mission acronym may change, ATMIS, AUSSOM, but donors and the UN are still problem-solving how to fund and sequence drawdowns while strengthening Somali forces. That's the dull, necessary work that never trends on X. 4. The rebranding playbook for Somalia and Africa more broadly. A. Lead with numbers people trust. Quote, UN/OCHA for needs, World Bank for poverty and growth, Transparency/IMF/EAC for governance and integration. This disarms Somalia is just chaos, takes with boring but powerful credibility. B. Show regional anchors and roadmaps. EAC accession dates, customs union milestones, port corridor projects, and blue economy pilots give investors a map, not a myth. C. Put the diaspora on stage formally. Diaspora remittances are lifeblood. Formalize them into investment vehicles, matching funds, SME guarantees, fintech rails. Washington loves blended finance stories. It signals self-help, not dependency. Corroborate with USAID/state and World Bank enterprise programs. D. Own the security transition narrative. Communicate specific, time-bound targets for force generation, police reform, and justice access, while the AU mission reconfigures, so drawdown reads as handover, not walk away. E. Tell sector stories, not country cliches. Digital finance, Somalia's mobile money penetration, ports and logistics, longest mainland African coastline, and fisheries, regulated blue economy, are sector narratives that donors and investors can underwrite. F. Humor helps, but receipts win. By all means, clap back with hydrate and touch grass, but pair it with annexes and dashboards. If a tweet is a spark, a PDF is the fire extinguisher. 5. Forward. Look. What to watch in 2025 to 2026. 1. Appropriations language and oversight notes in state/USAID. Accounts for Somalia. Watch for new conditionality, earmarks, or reporting writers following the Omar/Trump dust-ups. 2. AU mission financing, AUSSOM, and UNSC resolutions, rollovers, are drawdown timelines realistic given SNAF, Somali National Army capacity, and district-level governance? 3. EAC implementation, customs integration steps, and trade facilitation metrics, border posts, NTB reductions to turn membership into growth. 4. Humanitarian caseload drift. Do needs fall as forecast or spike with El Niño/La Niña cycles or conflict flare-ups? 6. A quick word on the latest politics, because context matters. Trump's most recent broadsides against Omar and Somalia followed the House's failed censure effort. The narrative then ricocheted through partisan media cycles with calls for deportation rhetoric from some GOP figures. However you slice the politics, it's a reminder that diaspora identity plus U.S. culture wars can warp serious policy debates about aid, security, and governance into 24-hour content. Humor interlude. If foreign policy were decided on X, we'd fund Operation Ratio and deploy fact-checkers in armored substacks. 7. A continental lesson. Africa's best counter to caricature is institutions that travel Ghana didn't change minds with slogans. It exported a credible electoral commission model. Rwanda sells logistics and safety. Botswana sells predictability. Somalia's best export can be integration, EAC, digital rails, and blue economy rules, institutional products that investors and donors can buy anywhere. 8. The take-home for Somali policymakers and diaspora advocates. Preempt the soundbite with a one-pager. EAC dates, UNSC mission status, FY funding, humanitarian needs trendline. Pitch the hill with district-level wins, clinics open, police trained, court staffed, linked to U.S. funds. Members of Congress care about deliverables. Package diaspora capital into investable vehicles, guarantees crowd-matched SME funds that can absorb small shocks without political drama. 9. Where we go next, teaser. From here, I can expand the series with a donor matrix explainer, US, EU, Gulf, Turkey, UN, and how each frames Somalia's risk reform bargain. A practical Somalia country pitch book section, sector SWATs, 2-page investor briefs, media framing analysis across U.S., African, and Somali outlets, who sticks to facts, who chases engagement, donors, narratives, and the way forward one. The donor matrix, who's actually bankrolling Somalia? United States and EU, still the largest bilateral donors. The U.S. handles security plus humanitarian. The EU blends budget support with governance reform carrots. Turkey, soft power and hard presence. Ankara runs Mogadishu's largest hospital, military training base, Turksum, and a growing commercial footprint at the port and airport. Gulf states, UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, compete for influence via aid, infrastructure, and political sponsorships. Somalia's factions often mirror Gulf rivalries. China, less dominant than in Ethiopia or Kenya, but building small infrastructure and eyeing port access. UN and AU, still the spine of humanitarian and security frameworks. Translation: Somalia's sovereignty is constantly negotiated in donor capitals. U.S. rhetoric, Trump's or otherwise, matters, but the structural mix of Turkey, the Gulf, and multilaterals is equally decisive. 2. Somalia's pitch book: How to Sell a Hopeless State. If Somalia were pitching investors or donors, the SWOT analysis looks like this: strengths, longest mainland African coastline, mobile money adoption, resilient diaspora, remittances approximately 23% of GDP. Weaknesses, Al-Shabaab insurgency, clan fragmentation, near-bottom corruption scores. Opportunities, blue economy, logistics corridors into Ethiopia/South Sudan, EAC market access, digital finance leapfrog. Threats, climate shocks, droughts, floods, donor fatigue, political relapse. This is not a nothing country. It's a fragile state with investable niches if governance reforms create predictability. 3. Media framing. Who tells Somalia's story? U.S. partisan media. Somalia as symbol of dysfunction, used against Ilhan Omar or immigrant communities. African media, mix of solidarity and schadenfreude. Somalia is the cautionary tale others cite. At least we're not Somalia. Somali diaspora outlets. More nuanced. showing entrepreneurialism, remittance stories, and cultural pride. Global Development Press, dry but crucial. OCHA dashboards, World Bank poverty notes, IMF country briefs. Lesson: Somalia doesn't control its global image. Others narrate for it. Until it invests in branding and storytelling, stereotypes will dominate. 4. Advice to African leaders. 1. Rebrand. Don't just react. Don't wait for outsiders or Trump to define you. Invest in national storytelling units, dashboards, infographics, diaspora ambassadors. If Ghana can brand itself as Year of Return, Somalia can brand itself as Blue Economy Frontier. 2. Invest in institutions that export electoral commissions, Ghana, anti-corruption models, Botswana, logistics hubs, Rwanda. Build something others want to copy. That's soft power. 3. Leverage diaspora as a superpower. Africa's most reliable FDI is not Chinese loans, but diaspora remittances. Formalize it into development banks, sovereign diaspora bonds, or SME funds. 4. Stay in regional clubs. Somalia's EAC accession shows the way. Africa's credibility grows when countries act through blocks, not as isolated supplicants. 5. Balance the pitch. Acknowledge problems honestly, poverty, corruption, but frame them alongside reforms and opportunities. Donors respond to transparency plus roadmaps, not denial or despair. 5 key messages to remember. Trump's attack on Ilhan Omar and Somalia is political theater, but rhetoric can still ripple into aid debates, stereotypes, and diaspora identity. Somalia's problems are real: poverty, corruption, conflict, but they are not unique. Congo, Sudan, and Nigeria face their own dysfunctions in different flavors. Progress is possible. Rwanda, Liberia, Ghana show that collapse can be reversed with governance, integration, and strong institutions. U.S. foreign policy remains heavily invested in Somalia. Humanitarian, security, and governance, regardless of partisan noise. The challenge is rebranding. Somalia, and Africa at large, must tell its own story, highlight sector successes, and mobilize diaspora plus regional blocs to shift perceptions. Closing note. Africa's future will not be decided in Trump rallies or Twitter spats. It will be decided in how leaders build credible institutions, harness diasporas, and craft narratives that make the world see opportunity, not just crisis. Or to borrow Ilhan Omar's retort, African leaders need to drink water, touch grass, and get back to the hard work of making states deliver. Thank you for watching The Bold African Voice, BAV. We break down the noise to bring you the truth about Africa, past, present, and future. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into African politics and global affairs. Together, let's shape the narrative. Until next time, this is BAV, where Africa speaks boldly.